Welcome to the Octopod. I'm Kyle Davis, head of the Office of the CTO. Join us as we dive into the latest technologies and trends shaping business. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just looking to stay ahead in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Let's unlock opportunities with technology together. Let's jump in.
Welcome back, everyone, to this special edition with our friends from Microsoft, where we're discussing the topic of Cloud Beyond IaaS. As I've said before, this will be a 15-part series, starting with our strategic conversations and then diving into the technology afterwards. And today we're on part 3, where we're talking about all things hybrid. We'll explain what that means in a minute, but I'm glad to be joined by Dan from Microsoft and Jake from CDW. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, so I am Dan Figueiredo. I am a technology strategist and architect on all things AI.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Jake Walsh, Senior Solution Architect at CDW.
Excellent. So, we use the word hybrid. It's a very overused word probably these days. But Jake, do you want, just for everyone, let's level set. What do we mean when we say hybrid?
I think, hybrid is an interesting one because to different people it does mean different things. But certainly from a Microsoft standpoint, and from the kind of perspective the Microsoft practice at CDW is coming at hybrid from, it means utilizing different technologies to allow you to put the right workload in the right place, and wrapping that up in a management ecosystem that gives you a single point of control.
That makes sense. And in your world, Dan, what does hybrid mean to you? Because that AI context probably brings a slightly different viewpoint than the infrastructure viewpoint.
Yeah,
me and Jake would have.
Was spot on. So often when I'm thinking about hybrid, it could very well be multi-cloud. So it could be people leveraging data that are in other people's kind of clouds. It could be that some on-prem data as well that they want to leverage for their kind of AI conversations. I think inevitably there's always the needs to kind of consolidate data typically to get the best out of AI. But the kind of lots of conversations I've been having is around if you can have nice small models, you can push them to the edge, and you can have AI on like internet connected devices, and they could be really powerful for transformation of organizations. If you think about like a factory floor or an oil rig or something to that effect, when communication with the internet is not easy, you can make things packaged up in such a way that you have AI still available on these kind of detached devices.
So really that hybrid piece is how do we blend the power of the Azure platform, the ability to deploy sort of what I call near-edge solutions, which would be like mini data centers, etc. But then, as you're saying, Dan, then how do we do that far-edge piece where we need a sensor or we need something running offline or in a really small form factor due to power or cost or environmental factors? So it's as much about the edge conversation, I guess, and about the data conversation. But for this section, so with the next one, we're going to talk about the data and AI in detail. But for this one, really, we'll focus then on how do we enable them near-edge platforms, so StackHCI. To your point, Jake, how do we provide that consistent management piece with the Azure Arc technologies? And then maybe look at some of the workloads we can run on top of these and one of your favourite topics around AVD later on in the conversation. So what are you seeing, Jake, as far as that sort of data center modernization, migration conversation for customers that maybe aren't ready to move their workloads away from maybe a traditional mainframe, or maybe they need to be at source for a reason?
So one of the things I'm typically seeing for those types of customers is transformation of workload that is appropriate for cloud. So that's moving workload that suits being moved to a cloud platform, modernized to a cloud platform, utilizing kind of the services we talked about in the last episode, but also seeing organizations adopt services like Azure Arc to extend their management plane, so that control plane you have in Azure, back to those on-premises workloads. So that central point of control is not, I log into portal A for this application or this service, portal B for that. This is somewhere else. I need to log in here to manage that. It's bringing that together in a single interface. And once that's done, that means services like your updates are controlled from a single place. Your automations can be controlled from a single place. You start to get to this kind of perhaps almost way of working that a few years ago we would have said, yeah, that's never going to happen. That's a utopian dream, isn't it? But actually you can start to get to that standpoint where you have a single point of control, a single point of management. You start bringing all of that together under a service like Azure Arc.
And Dan, you talked about offline about you've been involved in data center migrations and all sorts of different reasons for moving stuff. What are you seeing as customers, drivers in that space, and what are the workloads they're moving to different locations for different reasons?
Yeah, I often think that the cloud's for everyone, but not necessarily for everything. not many of the organizations that exist today were necessarily born in the cloud. So they'll have had this legacy that they'll have on-premise data for a variety of reasons, or even data sat within particular applications. Right? So often I like to think of things as either a push or a pull. There's either a compelling thing that they're drawn towards, like Gen AI kind of style conversations, and that might instigate a move of some kind over to Azure. Or equally, they might feel like they're now constrained by their legacy and they need to that's a push. There's an expense, there's an overhead, there's some kind of difficulty that prevents them from being agile. And so those are the drivers for kind of thinking about how do we have the most optimal hybrid or cloud-based set.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic that if we went back just a few years, we'd have probably had a very different answer, which would have been, no, everything has to go on Azure, and that's the answer to, and it's great to see that evolution and the fact that Microsoft are pushing Arc and StackHCI and these technologies, because it gives customers choice to run their workloads and store their data in the most appropriate location. But just in case everyone hasn't sort of come across it in any detail, Jake, but at a high level, what is StackHCI?
So Azure StackHCI provides a solution where you can run virtual machines, so be that Windows, Linux, and other workloads, on a validated solution that's then controlled from the Microsoft Azure platform. So for example, you might have a particular requirement for a workload that's Windows-based, it runs on virtual machines. Those VMs could be run on StackHCI and then managed through the Azure portal. And in the same way that you would manage, let's say, VMs in Azure, other services in Azure, you would do that through the Azure portal, regardless of where those StackHCI nodes were deployed. So the real power there is I could have, for example, shops, factories, whatever it may be, where I have these solutions deployed all over the place, but I manage them from that single pane of glass through the Azure.
And does that mean then that from a skills perspective, people perspective, we can start to consolidate teams, training on single platforms, rather than having to have, here's my infrastructure team and here's my cloud team, and they're always at loggerheads with each other? We can have that single unified IT function delivering support and value to the business.
100%. And what it also means, as well as having those cloud skills extended to on-premises, it means that any sort of automations you've built out, any practices you have, those are then extended to that StackHCI deployment. Loads of other benefits as well. Think of things like backing up your VMs on StackHCI. You could use Azure Arc to enroll them in Azure Backup. There's loads of benefits like that, particularly for, take that backup example, from a DR perspective. Oh dear, the ceiling's caved in and the data center in the shop is no longer working, but we're still connected to Azure. We can run those workloads there temporarily. There's loads of advantages like that.
And I guess Arc then is that term for the management capabilities, that sort of hybrid management capabilities where we can have a true hybrid environment now and run workloads wherever is appropriate for the business effectively.
100%.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we've got this platform that gives us compute, storage, and services that can be deployed anywhere, whether it's in any of the public Azure regions that exist globally, or effectively now any colo or data center facility that exists globally. So Azure now really is available everywhere, which is fantastic. What sort of things can we run on top of these platforms? And maybe Dan, from your perspective on the sort of the AI front, what do you see being run at the edge, I guess, on this sort of hybrid platform that Microsoft built?
Yeah, I guess there's often organizations who either through regulatory compliance reasons think they can't just leverage Azure's cloud capabilities, and therefore something like StackHCI is a good kind of capability for them. They can kind of put that next to either a traditional mainframe system they might have. So I was thinking about lots of banking kind of institutions I used to work with. But equally, there are some countries that are very kind of thinking about their sovereignty and the data not leaving the country. And sometimes they'll want to ensure that if they're using some of our AI services, that also things are happening within a boundary. So they can create that boundary. They could either leverage one of the library of models that are available or create their own, but they could then choose to kind of deploy that to that unit and manage it from a unified perspective. It looks like Azure like the rest of it, but then they've got kind of that control where they know the data's staying within the boundary that they care about.
No, that makes sense. And I guess if we then deployed this distributed set of data and applications, accessing them is going to be really important. We've got to get the users to the data, to the application. Now, sometimes that'll be a web, and we can do it over the open internet, which is great, but we still have these constraints around, devices, connectivity, latency, security concerns, data boundaries, etc. from that side of it. And I think Microsoft's drive over the last few years in AVD, sort of Azure Virtual Desktop, on the Azure platform has shown some fantastic advancements in performance, in management, in scalability. But if we're going to do what Dan's just said, Jake, and put the data on workloads at the edge, maybe we need to move the desktops there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's been an interesting sort of journey for ABD over the last few years. The number of enhancements, the number of changes. I think one of the things that's very interesting is the pace of change. The pace of improvement there has been rapid and significant. ABD on Azure StackHCI obviously is fairly new in terms of recent developments, but that's something, again, where if you have a requirement, if this application must run on this hardware in our data center, but we need a virtual desktop or a published application to access it, that is now a distinct possibility. And rather than the more traditional sense of VDI, where we need to put connection methods, brokers, all of the supporting elements, we can now run StackHCI nodes with AVD running the session hosts and the rest of it managed in the Azure cloud regions.
And that's, again, obviously going to greatly simplify management, resources, costs. But I guess also, because it's AVD, we get access to multi-session Windows 11, which is fantastic from a cost perspective. We get access to our licensing benefits through M365 subscriptions, etc. So again, we're consolidating costs, vendors, licensing, debt effectively from a technology perspective.
Yeah, and gaining all of the other advantages as well. Things like the fact when you connect to an ABD session host, you connect to the nearest point of presence. You're then routed over Microsoft's global network rather than over the public internet. And the ability to use services like the Azure Compute Gallery, create an image once, replicate it to multiple regions, multiple locations, great for DR purposes, for example. And those are benefits that would be difficult to kind of quantify in other solutions. These are things the platform provides you can take advantage of. They don't incur a huge cost. They don't incur a huge overhead in terms of time or resource. Very easy to consume and very powerful when they're used in that way.
Excellent. Thank you both. I mean, that's a great intro to the topic. We're going to obviously get into the detail of that in our follow-on sessions and really unlock what actually is all these technical architecture, how to use it, deploy it, etc. But maybe what we'll do is just get a final thought from each of you of where would you ask people to start thinking about if they want to get the value of edge or hybrid within their world. So Dan, we'll come to you first.
I mean, for me, typically, I'll reverse engineer any kind of conversation from what is the desired business outcomes and what are the things that we need to do to get there. And once you know what all the Lego pieces of capability you have, you can string together the kind of the solution that makes the most sense for your business, both economically and in terms of speed towards execution. And so that very well could include edge.
And Jake?
For myself, it would just be try Arc, just enroll a workload and see it. Get hands-on with it, see the fact that you can remotely manage that workload. You've got control of that workload. Try it out, test it. It's very easy to make that initial step. And once you see it, you'll see the power of it.
Sounds like a great piece of advice. So thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time. I've been Rob Sims, Chief Technologist for CDW.
I've been Dan Figueiredo, Artificial Intelligence Architect.
And Jake Walsh, Senior Solution Architect at CDW.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode. Be sure to check out the back catalogue for more great insights. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. And if you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. Catch you next time.